Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from the neurosurgeons of the Howell Allen Clinic, national leaders in brain and spine surgery, specializing in laser brain tumor surgery and robotic spine surgery. The Howell Allen Clinic. Your life is our life's work.
This is the Nash Villager podcast. It's August 20th, 2026, and 160 years ago today, back in 1866, a Tennessean, President Andrew Johnson, officially declared that the Civil War was truly over. That announcement is probably not what you learned about as the end of the war in your high school history class. The date actually may seem way off, basically a year and a half after General Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, which is what we generally all think of as the moment that it all ended. And we learn about that moment because by that point, the Southern forces under Robert E. Lee's command were the only ones who still had a shadow of a chance at victory. So when he surrendered, the Confederates did not have any other feasible options for winning the war as a whole. But in a conflict spread over multiple states, in a time before instantaneous communication was possible, and in the case of a war driven by a rebellious spirit, the most significant surrender may have been the one that clinched the end result, but it wasn't a cue for all the other Confederates to immediately lay down their guns. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with context and backstory from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Andrew Johnson set kind of a high bar for well and truly declaring an end to the war. He didn't just wait for all the fighting to be over. He held off until he could say that the federal authority had become the law of the land again in Texas. It was about as opposite as you could get from George W. Bush preemptively holding a mission accomplished celebration on an aircraft carrier, announcing an end to conflict in Iraq a full 8 years before the fighting there ended. And perhaps Johnson's more cautious approach was fueled by his experience as a military governor here in Tennessee during the Civil War. From early 1862, much of this state was officially in Union hands, with Johnson appointed to oversee martial law. But there were all kinds of little everyday rebellions by civilians living here, not to mention continual skirmishes involving small bands of Confederates who roamed behind enemy lines, seeking to cause chaos and disruption. He learned the hard way that being in control on paper didn't mean you had everything under control. And he saw, over and over again, that there was much more to the war than the major battles that made national news. To really say it was over, he needed to see that at least some of the finer points of control had been locked down. But even if you do only look at when the actual fighting ended and the Confederate units surrendered or disbanded, it's a more complicated story than just Lee waving the white flag. A few months before the Appomattox Courthouse surrender, the Battle of Nashville had essentially proven that there was no real chance for the Southern forces to regain military control in our part of the region, or what was known in that context as the Western theater of the war. Most everyone on either side seems to have accepted that as a foregone conclusion. But it wasn't the end of the Confederate Army of Tennessee. Now, that's the portion of the Southern forces that was involved in basically every major battle in this state. And after heavy losses at the Battle of Franklin and a thorough trouncing in the Battle of Nashville, it did retreat from Tennessee. But those soldiers weren't done. They headed to the Carolinas in hopes of somehow bolstering the effort to hold back Union General Sherman's ferocious march to the sea. And look, with hindsight, we can easily say it was futile of the Army of Tennessee's leaders to think they really had a chance of making a difference. But they weren't ready to accept the truth of the situation, even when they first heard of Lee's surrender. It took almost a week for General Joseph Johnston to finally throw in the towel. He sent a message asking for terms of surrender on the same day that Lincoln was assassinated. For various reasons, it took another 2 weeks to get things to the point where they could sign an agreement. Even then, Confederate President Jefferson Davis still wasn't ready to say that it was over. And as far as we can tell, the instigator of so many of those Tennessee skirmishes over the preceding years hadn't even heard any of the news. So it was still business as usual for Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest, all the way up until May 9th, when he finally delivered a farewell address and surrendered his forces to the Union Army in Alabama. Forrest told his troops to accept the loss with honor and submit to the terms of the surrender. The next day, Jefferson Davis was captured while attempting to disguise himself in women's clothing. But as the skirmishes involving the Union Army ended, the Confederate energy to keep fighting didn't exactly stop. Instead, it was redirected into night raids by vigilante groups who targeted civilians they didn't like, especially black people, one of which organized itself in Pulaski under the name Ku Klux Klan. And as you probably know, that group named Forrest its first Grand Wizard. So in a way, you could say that last gasp of the Civil War never entirely ended at all. In just a few minutes, more from WPLN and ProPublica's latest investigation into youth detention facilities in Tennessee. That's coming up after the newscast.
Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from the neurosurgeons of the Howell Allen Clinic, national leaders in brain and spine surgery, specializing in laser brain tumor surgery and robotic spine surgery. The Howell Allen Clinic. Your life is our life's work.
I like to say Nash Villager in the morning, this is Nashville in the afternoon. I'm Blake Farmer, the new host, and yes, WPLN's midday show is also a podcast, and we understand lunchtime listening may not be your thing, but that doesn't mean you have to sit out. You can listen wherever you get your podcast, like right here, or ask your smart speaker to play the latest episode of This is Nashville.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. One of Middle Tennessee's most congested highway corridors is getting privatized toll lanes, and the state just picked the company to build and manage them. The so-called choice lanes will run along Interstate 24 between Nashville and Murfreesboro. The idea here is that a private company will pay for all of the construction and get to keep much of the money drivers pay to drive on the lanes. The state chose a group of companies called Drive TN. The Nashville Business Journal reports it's led by a private sector transportation firm called Centra, along with its Spanish parent company. The group pledges to spend $9.2 billion building the toll lanes, and it says it will pay the state $24.8 billion over the course of the 50-year contract. The project will add 2 toll lanes in each direction on I-24 for up to 26 miles, redo 17 miles of existing lanes, and replace 37 bridges, as well as building 55 more. The first stretch of choice lanes is expected to open in 2031. Tennessee Republicans outside of Nashville have called for a state intervention into a city tax hike on Lower Broadway's honky-tonks. Top state Republicans want lawmakers to return for a special session to address higher property taxes on Music City's biggest tourist draws. Only outgoing Governor Bill Lee can call a special session, and with only a few months left in his term, Lee doesn't seem keen. At a press conference yesterday, Lee signaled his support for a more collaborative fix for Nashville businesses.
Well, it's really important that we listen to business owners, and we're doing that, and we're hearing that. It's also important to remember that the city makes collections for those business owners.
Lee says he's spoken with Mayor Freddie O'Connell on a more permanent solution, balancing the business owners' need for relief and the city's budget. O'Connell's office confirmed those talks, but wouldn't discuss specifics. A new report reveals what Tennessee does when it seizes illegal tobacco products. The Department of Revenue handles tax collections and money management for the state, but it has a special division that inspects and seizes illegal tobacco and beer products. The Comptroller's office just did a regular check-in on the agency. It found the department had seized products 176 times over the past few years. In its write-up, it said revenue officers seize products when an officer finds unstamped cigarettes or when an officer finds cigarette brands that are not on the state's tobacco manufacturers directory. If they're on their approved list, just unstamped, the agency is allowed to auction off the products. But if it's not an approved brand, officials must destroy the products, usually by crushing, burning, or compacting them. Officials have to document the process with photos, then get a supervisor and witness to sign off. While opposition's been getting loud during Clarksville-Montgomery County School Board meetings, now board members are cracking down. Clarksville now reports the board adopted new rules which say anyone who makes loud verbal comments or noises, stands behind or near a speaker while holding a sign, or obstructs someone's view of the meeting could be subject to removal. Signs are okay to hold while sitting in the audience. The district has been embroiled in controversy for months. Earlier this year, a bus carrying middle schoolers to a field trip crashed into a dump truck, killing 2 children. Parents and other community members have protested unanswered questions and unpaid medical bills. There's also been blowback after a former teacher showed obscene materials to a minor. Some of the heat is because he's married to the district's director of schools. Well, there's been a shakeup at the Nashville mayor's office. Longtime mayoral aide Kristen Wilson has resigned from her post, which involved overseeing city department heads. Wilson began working for Metro back in 2019 under previous mayor John Cooper's administration and continued under Freddie O'Connell. The Nashville Banner reports that Wilson cited a need to, quote, reflect on her career and life path. O'Connell has 1 year remaining in his first term and has launched a re-election campaign. Well, a Republican running for a state legislative seat in Nashville says the city needs someone who isn't always fighting with GOP leadership. Jayla Thomas is one of the few Republicans contesting the state house districts in Davidson County that lean heavily Democratic.
We don't have any representation because our elected officials would rather be performative than actually work together with the Republicans. Look, there's certain Republicans I don't like, but I still have to work with people all the time. We need a voice who can say, let's stop this. The 98% we all agree on, let's do that, and then we can fight about the outliers after that.
And this is Nashville. Thomas said she would oppose the expansion of private school vouchers, but also work with Republicans to cap property taxes. She's running against Democrat John Ray Clemens, who's not drawn a challenger since he was first elected in 2014. Proponents of Nashville's Greenway system are challenging residents to travel all 100-plus miles of available pathways in Davidson County this calendar year. Janae Harley is a resident of East Nashville who's actively working towards completing the challenge. She joined a midday talk show, This is Nashville, and emphasized how the challenge can encourage others to become Greenways enthusiasts just like her.
I think once people really start exploring and seeing the area and realizing it's not that hard for me to go from X to Y, or be easier once we start building these out and being able to connect on a bike where it's safe, or I can walk, or however you want to do your transportation. And so I think to me that's a big thing for Nashville and an important thing.
Harley added that walking the greenways also helps people visualize where connectivity is sufficient and where it's still needed. You can listen to the full show at thisisnashville.org and sign up for the Greenways Challenge at greenwaysfornashville.org. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Juvenile justice and how Tennessee's courts, detention centers, and prisons function has been a significant focus for WPLN journalists. Now, a new investigation has found previously unreported incidents in highly secure youth prisons. Senior criminal justice reporter Paige Flager sat down with This is Nashville's Blake Farmer to share the findings.
Interviews with dozens of former staff and youth have revealed how the operator of Tennessee's most secure private youth prisons failed to report suspected abuse and serious incidents. The company is denying wrongdoing, but the investigation by WPLN and ProPublica has already prompted a state agency to look into the incidents. And one of the reporters on the story is senior criminal justice reporter Paige Flager, and she's here to unpack the findings. Before we get into these findings, Paige, many people may not be familiar with youth prisons. In fact, as I was preparing today, I'm like, is prisons the right word? But talk to me about the landscape for young people who end up being held in custody.
Yeah, so it's very similar to the adult system where there are jails where people are awaiting a court date.
Short term.
Yes, and then there's prisons for people who have been convicted of a crime. It's similar in the youth system with a few big differences. Kids that are charged and adjudicated delinquent, they don't use the word convicted in the juvenile system. If they're adjudicated delinquent of a crime, they're taken into state's custody under the Department of Children's Services. The youth system also has a lot more privacy in hopes that these charges won't follow kids into adulthood. Here in Tennessee, like you were saying, one man runs the highest security juvenile prisons, a Tennessee businessman named Jason Cruz and his company, Wayne Halfway House.
Okay, so you spent several months looking into the most secure facilities run by Jason Cruz, which house youth who commit the most serious offenses. What did you find in terms of the treatment of those kids being held?
So my reporting partner and I, Aaliyah Swaby from ProPublica, we interviewed dozens of former staffers and young people who were at these facilities. We also reviewed emergency call logs, company records, and state documents. Staffers told us that Wayne Halfway House's leaders failed to report serious incidents of suspected physical and sexual abuse of kids to state officials across several of Cruz's facilities. These facilities are contracted with DCS, so they have reporting requirements that are tied to those contracts. They also told us that the company prevented the public from learning about violent attacks by reducing the number of 911 calls. The state is now investigating the incidents that we uncovered.
Part of reporting a story like this is approaching the company itself, the name of which, Wayne Halfway House. I understand that you provided multiple pages of information and questions. What has the company's response been?
Yeah, so we originally approached the company back in the spring, and we asked for a tour of Mountain View Academy. We visited in April. We got a pretty limited tour of the facility, just a couple of the main areas, like by the cafeteria and the library, things like that. And we actually met Jason Cruz at that tour for the first time. The company had not told us that he would be there.
Really?
So he was there when we showed up. And we were able to ask him some limited questions, but it wasn't really a formal sit-down interview. Once we had narrowed down our findings, though, we sent a really long list of questions to the company. Essentially, we don't publish anything without giving them a chance to respond. They did respond to many of our questions, and those responses helped shape what we ended up publishing. They can also be found throughout the story. We asked for a more formal sit-down with Cruz, but that did not happen. But broadly, their general reaction is that they're denying the allegations that we laid out in this investigation. In a statement, they said that Wayne Halfway House follows state policy and law. It vehemently denies that Cruz or his company ever discouraged staff from reporting serious or life-threatening incidents to the state or to 911. And it described our sources, its former employees, as untrustworthy with a clear bias against the company, and said that their allegations were substantially flawed.
Well, you know, there's another player in all of this, and that's the Tennessee Department of Children's Services, DCS, which does licensing of facilities like these youth prisons. What's that agency saying?
Yeah, DCS is really limited because of the juvenile privacy laws about what they can say publicly. But the department is already investigating the incidents that we uncovered during the reporting process. And we sent the things that we had heard about and the things that we knew about to the department to provide them with the information that we had gathered. The department said it's comparing the information that we gave them with their provider records to determine whether required incident and abuse reports were being made, whether appropriate medical care and notifications happened, and what actions were taken in response. So because of juvenile privacy laws, again, the results of that investigation will not be public.
I see. Paige Pfleger, that's Pfleger with a P, is WPLN senior criminal justice reporter and a fellow in the ProPublica Local Reporting Network. Her latest investigation on incidents inside Tennessee's youth prisons, available now at WPLN.org.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday, so subscribe in your favorite podcasting app to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you like this, you'll probably enjoy the Nashvillager newsletter, too. You'll get perspective from more of my colleagues at Nashville Public Radio and links to the stories we're following. Sign up for those daily emails at WPLN.org/Nashvillager. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.
Funding for the Nashvillager podcast comes from the neurosurgeons of the Howell Allen Clinic, national leaders in brain and spine surgery, specializing in laser brain tumor surgery and robotic spine surgery. The Howell Allen Clinic. Your life is our life's work.